Murder in Miramar solved after nearly 43 years. A woman was killed brutally inside her own home. And now police say that they know who did it and they have the evidence to prove it.
On January 22, 1980, police in the Florida city of Miramar discovered Evelyn Marie Fisher Bamford, a skilled psychiatrics nurse, sexually attacked and killed about midnight. Before DNA technology helped identify the murderer, more than 40 years after her death, authorities were still searching in vain. Who was this murderer? Was it a relative or a complete stranger? Hello, and welcome back to Cold Case Diaries. If you're new here, please consider subscribing as it helps us motivate to create more intriguing content for you. Today, we're going to look at Evelyn Marie's oldest unsolved cold case. Our investigation will lead us to Miramar, with more than 120,000 residents. The lovely community is situated in southern Broward County, Florida. The beautiful scenery and tropical climate of Miramar are well known. It's one of the most well-liked tourist destinations in the United States as a result of all these factors and the area's many tourist attractions. Charles and Ethel Fisher welcomed Evelyn Marie Fisher into the world on March 23, 1947. Evelyn attended Chilliwack Senior Secondary School in Sardis, a small town on the south side of Chilliwack, Canada, and after she graduated, she continued her education at the Riverview School of Psychiatry and Nursing. She finished her coursework in a short time and obtained her full mental nursing license. In Vancouver, where Evelyn was employed, she met the love of her life, John Bamford. This occurred in 1969 at a bar that Evelyn and her friends frequently visited. John worked as a bartender. "You know, I fell for her the first time I saw her," John stated of Evelyn. It didn't take long for John to win Evelyn over, and the two quickly developed a romantic connection. It was obvious to everyone who knew them that they were a couple made in paradise. Simply put, she was fun to be around. John said a few years into their relationship, "I never felt guilty about being with her." In Grand Cayman, John received a better employment offer. As a result, he was forced to leave Vancouver. Evelyn made a sacrifice so that their relationship wouldn't be hampered by distance. She packed her bags, left her job at the hospital where she had been employed, and made her way to Grand Cayman to be with John. After settling into a new location, following their eventual marriage, the couple enjoyed several blissful, trouble-free months together. They seemed to have their entire lives ahead of them as their love for one another continued to deepen with each passing day. Evelyn, however, had grown weary of Grand Cayman after just 2 years, since she could not picture spending the rest of her life there. When she finally spoke with John about it, she also expressed her desire to relocate. Although John had not anticipated this, he was aware that she would not be happy if she stayed in Grand Cayman, so he offered her all of his support. 3 days later, the couple relocated to Miami, acquired housing at the Haven Lakes Estate Mobile Home Park in Miramar. Both obtained jobs and started over with their lives. Evelyn was content and joyful. John was as well. 6 years had passed in the space of a single blink. A female friend of the couple eventually moved in with them. It's unclear exactly when or for what reason she moved in with them, but they embraced her with open arms. On January 22, 1980, John kissed his wife just before leaving the house and heading to work. Evelyn was the only person left at home. None of them realized that anything horrible would shortly happen. The day was much like any other day in their lives. Evelyn had to take some time out of work at the time to recover from knee surgery. There was really nothing to be concerned about, and it was anticipated that she would quickly regain her full health. The couple's friend came back from her outing that evening. She was eager to fall asleep in her bed because the day had been so exhausting. She discovered the front door was locked when she attempted to use it. She knew that either Evelyn or John had shut the door because it had already grown dark, so this wasn't uncommon. She was hesitant to disturb whoever was inside because she didn't know at that moment if any of them or both of them were home. She looked through her purse in search of a spare key, but quickly realized she had left the house without it. She slowly realized that if she didn't make an effort to alert anyone who was inside that she had arrived, she might spend the entire night outside. She waited and knocked on the door, but received no response. This time she knocked again, calling Evelyn and John's names, but still no one answered. She began to pound on the door shortly after as loudly as she could, but no one answered. She became increasingly terrified with each passing second and intuitively understood that something was seriously wrong. No one in the house could have escaped hearing all the noise she was creating. Everything was so peculiar. She attempted other entrances to the house as well, but they were all closed. She quickly came to the conclusion that calling the police would be preferable. She dialed 911 right away and explained the situation to the dispatcher. Officers from the Miramar Police Department arrived on the scene in a short amount of time. They then joined her in knocking on doors, and even went so far as to knock on the house's windows, but nothing could be heard coming from inside. After doing this for a while, the officers opted to break down the door and enter the house. The only way they could be certain that nobody was inside was to do it. They all entered the silent house warily, after quickly breaking down the front entrance. The living room was empty, and nothing seemed out of place. They moved on to the bedroom after that. They could never have anticipated the scene that awaited them there. Evelyn was lying on a bed, covered in blood. It resembled a scene out of a horror film. The couple's friend was taken aback by what she saw. She was in awe of what she was observing. Evelyn stopped moving. It was clear that she had passed away. It was clear that whoever had killed her had to bash something into her head. Police officers secured the area right away and started to thoroughly search the home. John was leaving for home after finishing his shift. Nothing appeared strange to him, and he was in a pleasant mood. The night air was cooler than ever and smelled cleaner. He was startled and simultaneously scared when he noticed the police cars parked in front of his home from a distance. He realized right away that there was a serious problem. He picked up the speed, and as he neared the house, he became aware of the police tape covering the entrance. Fear took hold of his heart at that moment. Unsure of what to anticipate, he entered the home and moved toward the tape. He was welcomed inside by police officers who had never seen him before. He then turned around to head back into the bedroom after noticing the furnishings and cushions had been moved. Blood covered at least half of the bed. Evelyn's body had already been taken to the hospital for an autopsy. He was then given a detailed account of what had occurred by the police, and when he learned his wife had passed away, he found it difficult to contain his tears. He was permitted to brew himself a cup of tea to ease his tension, and then went to the station with some cops to be questioned after that. After telling Texas what he knew at the station, he was eventually given permission to return home after what seemed like a very long period. A few days later, the findings of Evelyn's autopsies were published. It was clear that whoever had attacked her sexually had killed her afterward. DNA from her body was able to be obtained by detectives. It was nevertheless saved for later because the technology at the time was not yet developed enough to perform an examination. The detectives started their inquiry right away. However, they didn't have much to work with. In contrast, John would sob himself to sleep every night. He took responsibility for not being home the night his wife was killed. He thought she would still be alive if he had been with her. On February 1980, Evelyn was buried in the hometown of Chilliwack. Following the burial, Evelyn's family members attributed some of her passing to John. Some people even believed he had killed her. John, who was broken-hearted, found it all too hard to handle and fell into melancholy. He underwent a major character shift as a result of the entire catastrophe, and to manage the discomfort, he started using alcohol and drugs. He subsequently made a permanent move to England as well. A lead in the case appeared unexpectedly 2 months after Evelyn's death in March of 1980 for the advertisement detective. This is what transpired. In Volusia County, a woman was sexually abused and dangerously close to dying. About a 4-hour drive separates this location from Miramar. The attacker was quickly identified as Ronald Richards, a 33-year-old male. Ronald was found to be residing in Miramar. The police in Miramar were contacted by Volusia County officials to help them catch him. Ultimately, Ronald was detained and found guilty of attempted murder and sexual assault. He received a 50-year prison term as punishment for his crime. However, Evelyn's murder and the crime Ronald committed in Volusia County were so similar that Miramar police couldn't help but notice them. They started to wonder if he was also Evelyn's murderer. He lived only 12 houses from Evelyn, and he also had a peculiar habit of jogging at night, so it appeared extremely possible. He had a troubled past, as it turned out when you look closer. Before the Volusia County case for which he was imprisoned in 1975, he was found guilty of killing his girlfriend for the offense. He was sentenced to 4 years in an Ohio jail before being granted parole in 1979. All of these facts about Ronald were learned by Miramar investigators, who promptly put him at the top of the suspect list in the investigation. They lacked hard proof, nevertheless, to demonstrate that he was Evelyn's murderer, and the case became unsolved over time. Over the years, the case was examined several times, but none of these reviews produced anything. Detective Jonathan Zeller made the decision in 2021 to submit the DNA samples that had been extracted from Evelyn's body decades earlier for analysis. The DNA analysis findings were finally released after several months of waiting, and it confirmed what the investigators had long suspected. The outcome brought them to Ronald alone. The detectives were thrilled that the case had been ultimately solved because it was a significant development. According to Detective Zeller, it's an excellent sensation. Everyone that was involved in this case for the family, including Evelyn's husband, is happy as well. Ronald was imprisoned in Ohio for a different crime, so detectives did not need to worry about searching for him. He was charged with Evelyn's murder on November 30, 2022. Obtaining this indictment was a significant accomplishment. Detective Zeller stated that this was the first obstacle, and the next stage would be a trial, or no trial, because he might pass away in prison. That doesn't cause me any stress. John appreciated being informed about the developments in the investigation into his late wife's murder. He had given up on ever getting the lawsuit resolved, even if Evelyn's murderer was finally apprehended. He continued to feel the grief brought on him by her passing. Ronald is still incarcerated right now, but he will eventually be moved to Miramar to formally answer for the crime. Detectives thought he was a serial killer as well, and that he may have had more victims than they were aware of. The oldest unsolved cold case in Miramar history is the murder of Evelyn. It's obvious that Evelyn's situation is sad, but because of the authorities' tenacious efforts, her family has been able to receive much-needed closure. But because Ronald, the perpetrator, is currently serving a prison term, the hole her heinous murder left in their hearts will always be there. What sort of punishment do you believe he ought to receive for killing Evelyn? Thanks